How did the world come to be so insanely, fundamentally patriarchal? Robert McIlvaine, who is an historian and an author, wrote a book called Eve's Seed. He has an interesting and convincing theory about how the patriarchy rose to power about 10,000 years ago. Until that time, there is evidence that the sexes were relatively equal, with neither being in control, coexisting peacefully, with very defined roles, which made them interdependent. But men have always been challenged by the creative reproductive powers of women, especially since for much of human existence, the role of men in procreation was not recognized or understood. During this period of history, however, that I'm referring to, they had the vital role of providing food by hunting and gathering, and this sustained the family. That all changed with the invention of agriculture, for which women are most likely responsible. The impact of this was nothing short of revolutionary. In fact, McIlvaine calls it a mega-revolution, greater than that of any other event in human history. Because of this monumental discovery, men were displaced and robbed of that which defined their essential purpose. This magnified men's insecurity and incited intense envy, provoking men to prove their worth and virility by subjugating and oppressing females and eventually all feminine values. Women came to be seen as the cause of all men's problems, and it became imperative to subdue them and prevent them from becoming even more powerful. Coincidentally, at this time, Yahweh, a male thunder sky god, became prominent, and his popularity grew. And as his popularity grew, so did the need to destroy all feminine deities and replace them with male-only gods. McIlvaine proposes that the creation story contained in Genesis is a metaphor for this world-changing event. The eating of the apple by Eve from the tree of knowledge is a symbol of acquiring knowledge for the invention of agriculture. This is displeasing to the male god of Genesis, and he curses and drives both Adam and Eve out of paradise. And paradise is a metaphor for a space where men feel significant and secure. Women were blamed for ruining everything by displacing men, a perspective that has held sway for thousands of years of history, and even until now. Although evidence that turned up later caused other people to draw different conclusions. This is them being driven out. And this is the women who feel maybe this isn't true. You all know that it is called history, right? There's no her story in history. History means, it's defined in the dictionary as what happened with men. Now, the obvious truth is that each sex can find reason to be envious of the other. However, women and men can generally do almost all of the same things, with each gender performing better in certain areas. There are some important things that women can do that men simply cannot. And that is carrying, giving birth to, and nourishing babies from their bodies. An extremely important factor throughout history has been men's susceptibility to what reversing Freud, Freud talked about penis envy. Well, this author feels that men are susceptible to womb envy and breast envy. Men can't do this. See that little foot? That beautiful picture? This is a very famous one too. I can't remember the name of the photographer, but I love this. Isn't that wonderful? I'll leave that one up. Renowned psychoanalyst Horney introduced this in her paper in 1926 entitled The Flight from Womanhood. With regard to Freud's theory on penis envy, she thought Freud had merely stumbled upon women's jealousy of men's generic power in the world. Horney argued that motherhood provides women with, quote, a quite indisputable and by no means negligible physiological superiority. She accepted that penis envy might occur occasionally in neurotic women, but stated that womb envy occurs just as much, if not more, in men. Horney believed, based on her work with men, that men were actually envious of a woman's ability to bear children. Anthropologist Ashley Montague later expanded on the concept of womb envy in his 1953 book, The Natural Superiority of Women, which you might imagine was not a bestseller. But the importance of this idea for helping us understand history has been largely overlooked. The fact that women are physically equipped to do things that men cannot do has been a source of male insecurity and envy of women throughout history. The result is that men tell women what they may not do as a way of compensating for the things that men cannot do. Biology has established a no man's land. Men retaliate by using culture to establish a variety of no woman's lands. In other words, hell hath no fury like a man devalued. Now, when people begin to be aware that men have a role in procreation, a reversal began to occur, which took the previously held misconception that women were solely responsible for procreation and just stood it right on its head. And men became solely responsible for the creation of life. Dr. McIlvaine terms the reversal the conception misconception. After it was understood that men had something to do with it, it was easy enough over a long period of time to reach the conclusion that they had everything to do with it. The woman contributed little more than an environment for the potential child deposited by the man to develop. The human ovum was not actually discovered until the 17th century with the invention of the microscope. Aeschylus in 525 BC made this, well, that's when he was born, actually. I don't know when he made the statement, but he made this explicit by placing these words in the mouth of Apollo. The mother is no parent of that which is called her child, but only nurse of the new planted seed that grows. The parent is he who mounts. He goes on to explain that there can be a father without any mother, pointing to the myth of Athena, who sprang fully armored from Zeus's head. Zeus, who was the grandson of the creator of all, the great Earth Mother Gaia, is said to have swallowed his wife to prevent her from creating the child, and then to have given birth himself to Athena. Athena herself endorses this revolutionary change by saying, "There is no mother anywhere who gives me birth." A more powerful portrayal of the male usurping of the female creative force would be difficult to imagine. We should note, however, that these words were placed in Athena's mouth by a male playwright. The book of Genesis and all the rest of the stories that provide accounts of this great reversal were, of course, also written by men. The idea, however, was readily adopted because it seemed so obvious and persuasive, and because it well served the needs of displaced men. This erroneous belief provided men with some reassurance of their part in this vital area of life and served to bolster their claims of male supremacy. Prior to the agricultural revolution, women did the work of reproduction and got the credit for it. With the misconception firmly in place, women did the work while men took credit for it. McIlvaine calls it nice non-work, if you can get it. And throughout recorded history, men have been able to get it any time. Now, the excesses of the Roman world by the last century BCE were grotesque manifestations of exaggerated masculinity. These are the harem baths in Rome, where they kept all the women. This is a very famous painting with the thumbs up, thumbs down. Remember that with the gladiators, the Colosseum? Conditions cried out for an infusion of eros, or feminine values. The circumstances were right for a religion based on the lost feminine values represented in the past by powerful mother goddesses. The powerful goddess had to return, but she would have an easier time getting a hearing and having her values accepted if she returned in male form. And I believe that is just what happened. This is Jesus by Da Vinci. They call this the swing of the pendulum, the rise of Christianity, or the real teachings of Jesus. The rise of Christianity could be called the return of one of the powerful creative goddesses in male disguise. Jesus was no thunder god. What he was, in fact, seems more like a heavenly mother. Appearing, however, in a male form and calling God Father, he taught that it is appropriate, even necessary, to take up feminine values and practices. Consider the Sermon on the Mount, some of his most famous words. "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. Blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God." It is difficult to imagine a more radical departure from the male thunder god, Yahweh, who destroyed whole nations, including women and children, than these words. Some historians have observed that the subjugation of women, since it is the oldest form of dominance, is the prototype for the oppression of all minorities, such as the practice of slavery, which is so primary to our Southern history. If Jesus' message was to succeed in transforming a system based on power and dominance, it had to renounce male dominance over women. Despite the fact that the Christian church did not and does not treat women as equals, the fact is, Jesus did. Despite the fact that the New Testament was written and put together when the church fathers were in the process of securing anew the subordination of women, and that there are many attacks on women in it, the observable fact is not one negative statement about women is ever attributed to Jesus himself. I therefore propose to you that the teachings of Jesus have been and continue to be hijacked to suit a masculine agenda. In fact, we cannot even call the church's position on women Christian at all, unless one considers Paul to be the Christ. Rather than call the position of the church on women Christian, we should call it Pauline. When Paul sought to justify the subordination of women, he did not turn to the teachings of Jesus. Instead, he turned to the Torah, which we know as the Old Testament, to Genesis 2 and 3, which had already for centuries been used to usurp the importance of women. Paul put the consequences of the assumption that God is male in the most unmistakable terms when he wrote, "For a man ought not to have his head veiled, since he is the image and reflection of God. But woman is the reflection of man. Women must be veiled," he said, "because they are, unlike men, who are closer to the supposed male God, too imperfect." I won't read you all of the degrading statements that Paul makes about women, but suffice it to say that Paul was, in all of these places, and there are many, agreeing with Aristotle, who over 300 years before him stated unequivocally that women are monstrosities. Though it has been conveniently ignored, women were a core component of the birth of the Christian faith. They were disciples, prophets, and missionaries. Mary and Martha, who were the sisters of Lazarus, were the first to recognize, the first ones to recognize Jesus as the Messiah. According to the Gospel of John, Mary of Bethany was thought to be, Catholics believe that she is Mary Magdalene. She wept as she anointed the head of Jesus with expensive perfume. She then wet his feet with her tears as she kissed them and poured perfume on them, wiping them with her hair. Judas and the other disciples were indignant, seeing it as wasteful extravagance. But Jesus said, "She has done a beautiful thing to me." Her actions obviously demonstrated deep devotion and love for her Savior, but it also demonstrated her keen insight into his true identity and purpose. This is made clear by Christ's words when he said, "Truly I tell you, wherever this gospel is preached throughout the world, what she has done will also be told in memory of her." But she has actually not been very much remembered. In the other Gospels, Matthew and Mark tell the story, but they don't even include her name. Luke, who was one of the major agents in downplaying the role of women, alters the story to make this woman a sinner. John is the only writer of the four Gospels who names her. Jesus assumed she would be remembered for her great love and insight, but for the most part she has not been. This speaks volumes about the ways in which Jesus' attitude toward women differed from those of the church fathers and the men who were central in the Christian movement after the death of Christ. Not surprisingly, women recognized this suffering, serving man who taught feminine values as the Messiah. The men had a harder time accepting his meekness and his peaceful ways. They wanted a conquering king in all his masculine glory. Jesus first appeared to Mary Magdalene as the risen Christ. This was an unmistakable indication of his refusal to accept the inferiority of women and his rebellion against the system that devalued them. So if Jesus came to revive feminine values and abolish the masculine system of dominance, power, and hierarchy, how did the church come to be ruled by men? Well, there was a significant struggle in the early years in the church over the role of women. Most of it centered around Mary Magdalene. Okay. Despite the fact that Jesus appeared first to her after the resurrection, and this is recorded in 3 of the Gospels, Paul later gave the Christians in Corinth a version that sounds like it happened in an exclusive men's club. He first appeared to Peter, then to the 12. Then he appeared to more than 500 brethren at one time, and then he appeared to James, and then to all the apostles. Last of all, as to one untimely born, he appeared also to me. Paul simply excludes the women altogether. Although some Christian sects continue to view Mary Magdalene as an authority until the late 4th century, men were working hard to exclude her. As they gained more and more power to decide which of the early writings would belong to the canon, which would become the Bible, those books which gave women prominence, such as the Gospels of Mary and Thomas, were eliminated. By the 4th century AD, or I think they call it BC, or CE. Yes, CE. Yeah, it's BCE and CE. The idea that women could hold any position associated with authority was flatly branded as heresy. An outstanding and astounding example of the destruction of Christian values regarding women is found in the writings of this guy, Tertullian, who has been called the greatest Christian theologian in the West before Augustine. His misogyny was so